Hey friends, welcome to H2O Proof Leadership with me, Dr. Anthony Donovan. Hey, this is our first episode, and we're trying to work a few of the kinks out, but we're glad that you joined us. Why H2O Proof Leadership? Well, the answer is that pretty simple. Um, I've been working in the field of residence life at a college and university for the last 26 years, and the one thing that I can tell you about this field and this profession in general is, hey, welcome, is that you're going to find yourself in some stuff. Sometimes you don't know what you're going to get into, and I've spent more than my day, more than my share of days where my feet have been wet from the unexpected things that I might be walking in. So one of the rules for me is always buy waterproof shoes. So when you start thinking about that and you're able to plan ahead, and you'll never be prepared for whatever you find yourself in. And so I think that goes for people's leadership as well. You want to be successful as a leader. You want to be in a place where you can have your leadership be waterproof from the things, the deluges, the floods, the tsunamis, whatever you might want to call it, that come back from being a leader. And so I wanted to focus on having those kinds of conversations with people about leadership so that they might be able to be successful in being a better leader. One of the things that I've really learned about that, by the way, is that a lot of times we talk about leadership and concepts that are really highfalutin. In fact, I've gotten the student debt and the years of my life devoted to getting a degree so that I can supposedly talk about those things at that level. But let's be honest. A lot of the best things about leadership, the most true things about leadership that I found, are actually pretty simple things that are pretty basic, but they're sometimes overcomplicated. And so I wanted to try to have a little bit of a podcast and YouTube channel that would focus in on some of those things. Some of this is things that I've been training my staff on for the last 20 years in my role here at Belmont University. But I decided that I wanted to take some of that and put it out and share it with some other people. So here it is. Be kind. We're figuring some of this out. I'm a little bit of a new person to the YouTube world, and I'm trying to figure out some of those things. But we're working on it, and we'll get there, I think, with a little bit of help and a little bit of your patience. So we're doing pretty well, but we're still figuring it out. So one of the things that I would tell you that a lot of people that I wanted to talk about first, because I really believe it's something that isn't discussed enough, and is also sometimes something that I think is really kind of at the core of how people are successful. It's one of these principles of supervision and leadership. Well, let's take a minute just to talk about supervision. I think people are often good leaders without being good supervisors. I think good people are often good mentors without being good supervisors. I think people are often good coaches without being good supervisors. But I've never met a good coach a supervisor who wasn't all those things, both a good leader, a good mentor, a good coach. I think it takes being good at all those things in order to be really effective in your supervision. So I want to make sure that we talk about that in a way that allows people to know that these are the tenets that help you get there, to get all those things, and that just being a good leader is not enough. Being a good coach is not enough. Being a good mentor is not good enough. That in order to be really outstanding as a supervisor, you really need to be all those things for people. And I think it's good to understand some basic concepts. I think one of the most abused concepts, and one of the maybe perhaps that's not talked enough about with some real honesty, I think, is this idea of energy management. Look, you as a supervisor, you've only got so much energy, right? You can only do so much. You can only do so many things. You only got so much time. You have can only give to so many people. You can only do so many things, and before you know it, you just sort of run out. I've talked a lot about this, and I think it's at the core of some of the things I think that help people be successful is understanding the energy that they have for supervision and how they manage it. I think can be a really determining factor to their success as a supervisor. One of those things that I think is really central to that is this thought about understanding what happens when you work with a group of people, a group of people. I have this idea that I've thought about as I've watched people, and over my years I've seen this happen, is that I call it the principle of five. When it comes to supervising people, managing people, once you have about five people on a team, and it really doesn't matter if it's a team of superstars. I've seen teams that I thought would have just knocked it out of the ballpark. At least one person is always going to underperform. You can have four people, you can be very successful, and everybody can hit their objectives. You have three, two, whatever. But there's something about five. I tell you to think about the times you've worked in a group project. Maybe you did something for class or something, and you think about that. And think if you had a group that was five people, there was always somebody who didn't quite pull their weight. I don't know what it is about the dynamics of five people, but it must give people space and freedom to think, or maybe there's just not enough room around, especially if you get five really high caliber individuals. Somebody's going to take on more energy and more of a responsibility or role in a group, and maybe that just encourages people to underperform. All I know is that, generally speaking, I've seen when you have five people on a team, at least one of them is going to underperform. In fact, I think the further you go with that, when you go further with that, you're going to find that some people, the more people that you add, if you have five and you add 2 to 3 more people, at least one more person is going to underperform. You add another 2 to 3 people, and now you're talking about potentially 11 people that you're supervising, and you're going to have 2 or 3 people that are going to underperform in that situation, and that can be really affecting on the performance of a group, and it can certainly be a very much a draining situation on you as a supervisor. I'm one of these people who believes that really, to be honest, if we're being truly true about ourselves, most of us can only supervise effectively 8 to 10 people anyhow, because the diffusion of the energy that we have to supervise people is just so great. It doesn't mean that you can't sort of multiply that by having other people supervise other people. You know, I have a organization of a couple hundred people. I don't supervise all of them directly, but I do supervise about 8 people directly. And sometimes, I'll be honest, I really run out of space and energy for those 8 people. But fortunately, I put that energy into them, and they in turn put that into other people. So we're able to multiply our ability to be able to supervise people. But we all run into the same problem. You know, once we get in past 5 people, we've usually got a few people who underperform. The more people we get, the more people that we have to underperform. And to be honest, that creates some of the challenges for us. So here's the thing. This is what most people think about supervision. They think about if I have 100% of my supervision energy, and I'm trying to get 100% productivity out of the people that work for me. Most people think that this is really a case of where I'm just going to put 20% into each person, and that'll produce 20% back, and I'll get the productivity that I really want. The problem with this is that this is really kind of a folly, and it's really not sustainable. People just aren't that equal like that. Putting 20% in one person doesn't produce the same result in another person who put 20% in, especially when you have somebody underperforming. And this really lies in the nature of sort of what is the challenge and the problem for people who are sort of underperforming. And this is really starts to show some of the weakness of having that thought of 20%. So here's what happens typically. The typical person, so you have 5 people, somebody's underperforming. Now you can't just magically create more supervision energy in yourself. You have to take it from somewhere. What happens in most cases is that people, managers, supervisors make the decision to temporarily take their energy and supervision away from somebody and put it into somebody else. In this case, let's just say that they're going to put it in this underperforming employee. What they'll do is they'll take 15% from three other people, and they'll devote that energy into that person. Now, here's the thing. It's not a bad idea to put extra energy when somebody's underperforming, but there are some challenges when that continues to be the case. And there's some things that I want to challenge about the idea of continuing to put energy into people who underperform. What might be better is a different way of thinking about it. But so here we have somebody who's underperforming, and they decide that they're going to be a problem, and you need to put some energy into it. Now, look, before you get started with all that, something that I think everybody has to sort of think about is, what is my responsibility as this person? How much do I have to creating this situation? What did I do to this? Have I given the person enough training? Have I given them the energy that they need to be successful? Have I done enough to help them onboard successfully? I think when you're a manager, you have to ask yourself some of those questions. Did I do my job? Did I give them the things that are going to help them be successful? And look, if you didn't do that, then you're probably going to need to spend some energy to make up some of that. And it's probably going to mean that you're going to have to take away from some other people. But let's assume that you've given that, and this person really is underperforming, and you've done your job. Where do you go from there? Well, like most people, I think when we have a problem, we put that energy into somebody, and we think it's going to fix the problem. Here's the thing. In most cases, let's just take this person, and you're putting 20% of your energy into them, and they were probably giving you a 10 or a 15% productivity out of that, maybe even less. In the meantime, you have other people who are you're putting that energy in, and hopefully they were giving you 20%. But what most people do is that they put that energy into somebody else, and there's some things that I think you need to think about. If I'm a person putting energy into that person, if I'm the person doing that, if I'm that person and I'm thinking about that, what should be my expectation from that investment that I put into it? What should be the return on investment, I guess, in that? Here's the thing. I think most people, they make a mistake, a critical mistake. They put all this energy into a person, and then that person starts putting effort out. And they make the mistake that the person's giving the effort, so therefore it must be improvement. I hate to tell everybody this, but effort is not the same as improvement. And a lot of people get mistaken by the idea that, hey, if I can just have that person improve, they'll get better by putting out the effort. Sometimes effort is a part of the problem, and sometimes effort does produce an increase in the productivity of a person. But a lot of times the problem is bigger than that. Maybe somebody's lacking a set of skill sets that they need. Maybe they don't have the talent that they need to be able to be successful in that. Maybe they don't have the kind of understanding or about the needs that you have in order to be able to do that. There are a lot of great people that I've seen who are put out the effort that you want from something, but they just don't perform. I mean, have you ever seen somebody who works really, really hard, but they're habitually the last person to show up in the performance? I used to be a shoe store manager, and I had a person who would work a lot of hours, and they would work really hard to try to sell shoes, but at the end of the week, when I start counting up their sales, there was something about them. They were friendly and they were kind, but they didn't know how to turn that interaction into a real sale for people. So a lot of times, even though they would spend as much time or more time than a lot of the other employees selling, they wouldn't actually produce sales. And so sometimes effort isn't enough. But here's the thing that most people do. They put that 35% into somebody. They think that that's going to improve it, and they continue to keep putting in that 35%. What happens a lot of times, and sure enough, you keep putting 35% energy into there, guess what happens? Somebody's performance is improving, but you have to remember that, what's really causing them to improve? Is it my extra attention and energy that I'm putting into them? Is that what's giving them a boost? Is that really the thing? Or are they actually really improving? So not only do you have to worry about understanding that effort does not equal improvement, but you have to also understand that your energy boosting somebody else is not the same as somebody fixing the issue and actually being better and producing better. I've suggested that perhaps maybe there's a little bit more of a radical idea. Thinking a little bit on the right slide here. Thinking a little bit differently about it. Imagine if you stopped pouring into the problem. What if you put that 35% into that person, did the things that helped them put them on the right path, and then decided that instead what I want to do is I'm going to back off. I'm going to take that extra 15% that I have been putting and the extra and even more, take that extra 10% from them and redistribute it to somebody else. What could happen? Now, here's the other thing that I think I've noticed. When we're talking about the principle of 5, I've usually realized that even in a group of 5 people, you're going to have 2 superstars. There's going to be, not only are there going to be one person who underperforms, but there's probably going to be at least 2 people who overperform. That might be part of the reason why people underperform, is that 2 people overperform, often producing more and doing more, and it makes it easier for other people to underperform. But in most organizations, most of the time when I've seen teams of this that I'm leading, and I have 5 people, there's usually 2 people who step forward to really lead and produce a lot more. Here's the funny thing about them. If you took that 20% and you took 10% away from the person who was underperforming and didn't give them anything extra, and you fixed the things that you needed to fix, and you did the things that you needed to do, and you took that extra 10% and put it into your 2 superstars, giving them a combined 25% energy each for one of them, for a total of 50% of your supervision energy. Here's the thing. What happens is that people who overperform, even they let's assume that you give them 25%, the productivity that you're going to get back out of them is probably going to be 35% of the productivity that you're looking for. So 25% probably produces 35. 25 in a second person produces 25. So here's the thing. Same amount of energy distributed among the 5 people, 10% for the person who's underperforming. Guess what? At 10%, they're probably giving you about 10% of what the performance is. It probably actually equals out and matches up to what their productivity is. Sure, it's not going to be 20%, but here's the thing that's really interesting. This is the thing that I've seen. When I take those 2 superstars and I put that extra 5% in each one of them, and they produce 35% of the productivity, here's what happens. They make up the difference of that underperforming personnel, because one person alone is making up the difference that you would have gotten out of that person, even at 20%. And then the second person gives you a bonus, an extra 10% in productivity as well. And so what you end up is roughly 110% productivity for a 10% increase in 2 people and a 10% decrease in another. And you offset the losses that you have from that person not performing well, and then you get a little extra. See, so here's the thing that happens. This is why it's important to make sure that you understand that effort is not the same thing as improvement. So when you take that energy away, and if they don't improve, and it's not immediate and obvious, which I think is really essential, and immediate can be a little bit of a different definition for everybody, but most people, I think, need to have that thing show that their improvement is going to be immediate and obvious. Sometimes immediate means taking a little while, but let's assume that you reduce that energy down to 10 and they start doing better. And instead, instead of 20%, maybe they give you 15%. You're putting 10% into them and you're getting a 15% return in productivity. And on top of that, you're getting another 20% from your 2 superstars. See, here's the real challenge for most people. Here's the worst thing that happens when somebody who underperforms and perpetually underperforms, and you're worried about what you have to do to get rid of them. One, if you can find a way to lower that energy into somebody and take it away and devote it to other people, probably can make up the productivity of somebody else, even somebody who's underperforming, by putting that energy into somebody else who's overperforming or has the capability to overperform, especially with a little extra attention. The other thing that happens is, look, somebody underperforms. If they underperform long enough, what really is the worst thing that happens? Some people say, well, my team suffers or whatever. I've sort of shown you that most cases that really isn't the case, that if you apply the right amount of energy into people, distribute it out in the right way, you can most often make up the energy from somebody that isn't. But look, ultimately, it's not okay for somebody to continue to underproduce and to underperform. So what happens? What's the worst thing that happens? And you get there, you have to fire somebody. Yeah, it's tough. It's not something that everybody wants to do, but inevitably sometimes that's the thing that has to happen. My experience has been that the worst thing that happens when you fire somebody else, the worst thing, isn't that your team has to work harder. It's that you might get somebody just as bad. If that's the worst thing that happens, then why would you not think about making a change? Because at the worst, it's somebody, you might have to go do this thing again, put some energy into somebody who doesn't. But there's a good possibility that you might get somebody who performs really well, maybe even overperforms a little bit. If you can get somebody who performs 20%, isn't it worth that? Because you continue to put energy into those people. Your other team can overperform, and you're not putting all this energy into the same person who was continually draining that. So I'm a big believer that sometimes the best answer is to let somebody go, and to change it and put somebody new. To be honest, if I had to make a choice about the places where I want to put my energy at, I want to put it in somebody new. I'd rather have 20% and put into everybody, and I'd rather that maybe even 25% in a new person, because eventually they're not going to be a new person. Eventually, if I was going to have to spend that extra energy on somebody, I would much rather spend it on getting somebody up to speed and somebody who can maybe be a fully contributing member to the situation than somebody who might be draining that. Here's the other thing too. Sometimes when you let that person who's doing poorly, right, the 10%er, somebody who, or maybe even worse, they're the people that you're putting 35% in, right? That 35%, eventually some of the people who are performing well, your superstars, they start to resent that idea that you continue to put all that energy into somebody who doesn't really produce the results. I find that the people who are the real overachievers, the real overperformers, are often eager for more investment from you as a supervisor in them so that they can even be better, so they can prove even more what a superstar they really are. One of the things that I find too is, as a supervisor of supervisors, sometimes one of the things that I have to look for is I have to be careful about how much energy my people are putting into these people that they're leading. These people can just be these kind of soul suckers, these energy suckers, these kind of energy vampires, if you will, that people that just drain and drain and drain. And especially if you've got really talented and gifted and caring supervisors, sometimes they can make the mistake that I need to continue to put energy into this person so I'm doing my job. Sometimes as my job as the supervisor of supervisors is to sit there and say, hey, look, I know you've put a lot of energy into this person. I know, and it doesn't seem like it's really working. It doesn't seem like we're getting much out of it. Maybe we're seeing effort, but we're really not seeing improvement, and maybe it's not even immediate or obvious. And so sometimes that's my job as the supervisor of supervisors, is to say, look, you're not making a good distribution of your energy here, your supervision energy, and I think we need to make a change. Those are always hard because people, again, generally speaking, if you've got the right kinds of people being your supervisors, they're people who care about the people who work for them, and they want them to be successful. And to be honest, they're probably asking themselves some of those hard questions that we talked about a little bit ago. Hey, did I do my job? Did I do my part to make sure that person's successful? Sometimes one of the hardest things I have to do to convince people in a supervisory role is, hey, let someone else go so that we can bring somebody else in. And I'd rather have you spending that energy on bringing somebody new along and helping them be successful than continuing to pour into somebody who isn't. That can be really tough. Again, by nature, most of us want to do this. We want to put 20% in everybody. We think that we really believe in equality, right? We want to have everybody have the same thing. I tell people sometimes it's not really about equality. Back supervision in general is about the idea that most of us, we want to feed everybody. I want to make sure that everybody gets fed. But I don't necessarily think that it's necessary for everybody to be fed the same amount. Some people need more. Some people produce more. And it's important to understand where those things are. I don't want necessarily somebody who just needs more for the sake of more. I want somebody who needs more because they're going to produce more. They're going to be able to create more. They're going to have more output from that. And when I say produce, I'm not talking about something really generically like, oh, everybody's just this product of their productivity and their output is the only thing we measure people on. No, but we're not all just creating a product. What we are doing is that we are putting forward energy that goes into to the success of organizations that we're in part of or the groups that we're a part of. And I want to make sure that the people that we have working for us are putting out the most of that energy and making the most of the energy that's being put into them, because I want them in turn to replicate that in other people. So even within a group like us where we have hundreds of employees, when I send one of my supervisees out to go supervise their people, they in turn have to make some of these same kinds of decisions. And if they make them right, our energy, our output that we create for our organization is often far more in excess of the energy we put in. And this is how you get to be successful as an organization, when you have the ability to take the increases in people's productivity that's greater than the amount of energy you're putting into them, and having them do the same thing, replicating that in other groups of people that they're responsible for. Then you have an organization that overperforms, super succeeds. And that's really what we're looking for, right? That should be the whole point to our supervision in those people, is to be able to help those people. Sometimes when I talk about succeed, it also means the idea of growth. I want people to grow, because if I'm putting energy into somebody and they're growing, so what happens with them is that when they're growing, they become capable of more. So when I put an energy into them, it immediately produces more because they have higher capabilities. So look, everybody isn't the same. Everybody doesn't start at the same place. Everybody doesn't start on the same day. You have people who are far more experienced than other people, and that energy should produce more in theory. And that's why it's so really important to be able to make sure that you understand and get your energy management. So let's go back to the basic tenets here. A little summary. The principle of 5 says that for every one person that you have, you're going to have one person that underperforms. It says that when every 2 to 3 people that you add, at least one more person will underperform. Generally speaking, what we are as supervisors is the idea that we would be able to do this. We can supervise pretty effectively based on the energy that we have and the ability to divvy that out. We can supervise somewhere from 8 to 10 people effectively before it becomes bigger than the amount of energy that we can do. That's when it's important to have people who supervise other people beyond us. Most of us want to give into the idea that everybody should be equal. Everybody should get 20% of our energy. The fact of the matter is that that's sort of unrealistic and it's kind of foolish. What we see often, though, is sometimes what we have is we have the idea that sometimes we would decide to devote energy to people, and when they're struggling, underperforming, we pour more into them and we take away from other people. And that's okay, as long as that energy that we put into leads to results that say that improvement is obvious and immediate, and that effort is not confused for improvement. That's really important. The other idea that we talked through today, and one of the key concepts, is the idea that if we take that energy and we put some energy into somebody and we give that to them, then the next step should be to, once we've poured in and we've done the things we're supposed to do, is to take away that energy and see what happens. Reduce it down to as much as we can, lower we can do. And then in turn, put that back into those people that really are producing well for us. Those people who are potentially overperforming. And what we'll see there is those people will overperform even further with a little extra. And this can often offset and sometimes even improve upon the output that the collective group has, even for the person who's struggling. Finally, the worst thing that can happen when you have to let somebody go who fails to be able to make those improvements is that you end up basically with somebody who's exactly the same. Please remember that the thing that's really important today is, hey, is that if I'm going to put energy into somebody, I want it to be put into somebody that has the potential to, at the very least, produce equal to the rest of other people. So if I put 20% in, I want to get 20% productivity out of them. If I put 20% in them and they give me 20 or 25 or 30%, even better. I would much rather do that than putting it into somebody who continues to show that they're underperforming. So there's some basics for you. There's a little recap, if you will, about how to deal with energy management. I think one of the most difficult, but also simply one of the easiest things to do as a manager if we understand the concepts behind it. And so I think when you're able to do some of that and you're careful about how you apply your energy and you understand how you put that energy to people, not only will you be a more effective supervisor, but I think you'll also feel energized by the experience of supervising people. And when you do that, that's when you H2O proof your leadership so it can survive some of the challenging aspects of being a leader. Hey, this is Dr. Anthony Donovan for H2O Proof Leadership. Look forward to talking to you the next time. Hang in there, and we'll see you soon.